Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. Eu vi mamãe Oxum na cachoeira, sentada na beira do rio. Eu vi mamãe Oxum na cachoeira.
Saudações de paz e de amor cósmicos, meus queridos irmãos de caminhada. Eu sou Flávio Salazar Melquisedeque e mais uma vez estou aqui com o meu cardíaco transbordando de amor e de gratidão por essa oportunidade que eu tenho de estar ao lado de vocês, de estar junto com vocês nesse momento mágico, nesse momento especial, nesse momento quântico. Esse programa onde nós explicamos, através do entendimento da física quântica e da mecânica quântica, as lendas, as parábolas, as histórias e os acontecimentos que fazem parte do nosso cotidiano diário, tentando trazer para a luz da ciência as experiências espirituais e metafísicas que todos nós passamos dia após dia após dia, porque afinal estamos imersos em um mundo cósmico multidimensional que, embora não consigamos perceber as suas sutilezas, estamos interagindo constantemente. Estamos sob os efeitos da ação e da reação. Então não há de se negar que o plano espiritual, que as multidimensionalidades influenciam na nossa existência, influenciam nesse momento tão importante que a humanidade está passando, esse momento onde nós reclamamos a nossa consciência crística, esse momento onde nós nos mostramos prontos para receber todos aqueles conhecimentos que foram guardados na nossa queda consciencial, que são nossos de direito e que estão aí esperando apenas que nós estejamos maduros o suficiente para poder fazer o bom uso. E o caminho do amadurecimento é a experiência, é a vivência, é a troca de informações, e por isso que esse programa, o Momento Quântico, foi concebido e está sendo idealizado, para que nós possamos trocar informações e nos preparar, nos capacitar para fazermos bom uso dessas informações sagradas, secretas, que são nossas de direito. Então, meus irmãos, hoje nós vamos dar sequência ao estudo aprofundado que nós estamos fazendo sobre a mudança da Kundalini do planeta Terra, por que ela sai do Oriente e vem para o Ocidente. Hoje, em especial, nós vamos entender por que a ativação dessa Kundalini ela não foi feita instantaneamente, no momento em que ela sai do Tibete e vem aqui para a Cordilheira dos Andes. E hoje nós vamos entender que existe todo um sistema cósmico, energético e vibracional que vai auxiliar a impulsionar a humanidade para dentro dessa nova era, a Era de Ouro, a Era de Aquário. E esse sistema ele é como se fosse um relógio com as suas engrenagens e tudo tem que funcionar da forma mais harmônica e mais perfeita possível para proporcionar o salto quântico que a humanidade tanto busca e tanto merece. Então, meus irmãos, ao longo da nossa caminhada aqui no Momento Quântico, estudamos muitos temas como a geomancia, o posicionamento das pirâmides, as construções das pirâmides, e isso é muito importante porque o entendimento desses mecanismos nos faz entender uma dessas engrenagens que vai ajudar a humanidade a entrar nessa nova Era de Ouro. Então hoje, dando sequência ao documentário Uma Nova Humanidade, do querido irmão Drunvalo Melquisedeque, nós vamos entender a importância da relação da Kundalini do planeta Terra com a grade de consciência crística, que está já ativada, já está em funcionamento, e desde então a humanidade vem despertando, a consciência vem despertando. Percebam que são muitas as engrenagens desse mecanismo e a gente não pode entender que o despertar da humanidade vai acontecer pelo simples motivo de estarmos dentro do cinturão de fótons. O cinturão fotônico é uma dessas engrenagens, que é um desses instrumentos que compõem essa grande orquestra cósmica que vai reger a humanidade para a Era de Ouro. Então hoje nós vamos entender o porquê que essa grade crística consciencial foi e é importante para esse momento de desenvolvimento, esse salto quântico que a humanidade vai dar. Mais uma vez, repito que nós brasileiros estamos em um local abençoado, nós estamos em um local que é o centro de toda essa transformação que a humanidade está vivenciando. Então eu faço aí um apelo a você, meu querido irmão, acredite na sua terra, acredite na energia ancestral que tem esse solo sagrado que foi desde muito tempo preparado para ser o berço da nova humanidade. E não é à toa que a energia Kundalini saiu do Oriente e veio para cá, para a América do Sul. Não é à toa que você, meu querido irmão, está despertando, está saindo da ilusão da Matrix, do véu de Maia, e está percebendo que realmente existe muito mais aí, além daquilo que nos foi contado, daquilo que nos foi passado. Por isso, meus irmãos, muito importante que vocês entendam tudo isso que o nosso querido irmão Drunvalo vai falar. Percebam que ele e a sua equipe, que fez esses rituais de ativação em pontos específicos, percebam que eles não foram as únicas pessoas. O Drunvalo não foi o único que recebeu essas instruções. Muitos outros grupos desempenharam o mesmo papel no mesmo momento que ele. Inclusive aqui a nossa casa, a Fraternidade Pax Universal, também participou dessa ativação. Nós enviamos grupos a locais sagrados com exatamente esse mesmo intuito de realizar as cerimônias de ativação. Então foi realmente uma grande sincronicidade que está acontecendo na humanidade, e é uma grande honra poder fazer parte de tudo isso. Então, meus irmãos, sem maiores enrolações, vamos dar continuidade à série Uma Nova Humanidade do Drunvalo Melquisedeque. Lembrando que se você está sintonizando o nosso programa pela primeira vez, veja os episódios anteriores para entender, para pegar o começo desse caminho, dessa jornada filosófica e esotérica que nós estamos trilhando aqui no nosso programa Momento Quântico. Então, meus queridos irmãos, fiquem aí com mais um capítulo, mais um fragmento desse documentário maravilhoso, e em instantes voltamos aí com a nossa reflexão.
Geometries that were above the earth. After probably a number of crystals that approached nearly 1 million crystals, this had a dramatic effect on the unity grid above the earth. But by 1989, and this was documented from the people that I work with at any rate, by 1989 the unity grid around the world was geometrically proper, meaning it was an icosahedron, pentagonal dodecahedron relationship, and energy was moving through it and flowing through it for the first time, but it still was not perfect. There were still problems involved in this, and more corrections need to be made. By the mid-90s, there was a small group of people. This number of people was probably less than 100 people. It was probably closer to 70 or 80 that were experts on subtle energies. And I was one of those, but only one. There were many, many, many other people that were just as important doing what they were doing on those levels. And we were directed to go to very specific pyramids and to make very specific changes, and not changes in the grid or by changing the energies of the pyramids or the temples, but rather the indigenous people that lived in those areas had done things in their lifetime that had caused a distortion in the energetic body of the earth. We had to go into the Anasazi at one point and make corrections in the Four Corners area where we are now because of what they did over the years that they were involved. We then were involved with the Maya and in Guatemala and Belize and in that area down in there, doing ceremony after ceremony after ceremony to solve the problems of which what they did a long time ago. We then went into Peru with the Inca, and each time, by the way, we were invited to these places. We didn't just show up and say, hey, we want to do something here. Each time, the people of that area would ask us to come there, and we would always accept it, and they knew exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. The Incas appeared while we were in Mexico and said that the shamans wanted us in Peru. When they got there, though, they didn't just accept us. We had to show by our actions and our energies signs that would come from within Mother Earth to prove that we were the people. Each time this was always the case. It didn't matter what we said, it was what Mother Earth said in our behalf. And we passed every one of these tests and began to correct all these things. We went into New Zealand, and there is a very good video that will be coming out very soon to show you how and what these kinds of things look like when they're in real life taking place. And then I wrote a book called The Serpent of Light. And this book described the interaction of myself and other people I work with approximately a little less than 1,000 indigenous tribes in North and South America. This was about the same energy times that the Mayans are talking about with the precession of the equinoxes of the last 13,000 years and the last 26,000 years. The Serpent of Light talks about the Kundalini of the earth moving from the western mountains of Tibet to the northern mountains of Chile. This was an extraordinary historical event that almost nobody on earth knew that was taking place, but it was huge, it was massive. And the energy comes from the center of the earth and finds a place. It comes out very much like a snake. That's why it was called the Serpent of Light. And when it finds, and first it moves all over the world, moving from every single area of the earth, and then it finds a place and it coils down inside the earth, and it stays there for the next 13,000 years. And this energy is the Kundalini. It wakens the people in that region who become the teachers of the world, just as they have been in India and Tibet for the last many thousands of years. And but now that it has moved to the Andes, it will be the Chileans, the Peruvians, the Argentinians, countries like as far away as Colombia and Brazil and Ecuador. These energies are going to awaken the souls there. But the Kundalini was also aimed on the western side of the mountain out over the ocean, so that it went out over the Polynesian world, out over to Easter Island and to Moorea and out further, all the way as far as New Zealand. And so there was an awakening, a new awakening, and brand new spiritual energy that the world has never seen. And that energy moved into Chile in the year 2002. In 2003, or later 2002, I went to Chile and went to the mountains there to experience this energy directly. But I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything. I was very confused. I really didn't know why I couldn't feel anything. I came back home. I waited a year and a half. I went back down there again to feel it. I felt absolutely nothing. And I didn't understand because I knew it was there. There was 112 tribes sitting in a circle waiting for it to come in when it arrived. And they knew it was there, but it wasn't working, and I didn't know why. Then we received an invitation from the Arapa Nui, a tribe that lives on Easter Island out of Chile. And they wanted us to come and do ceremony with them. And it was followed by an invitation from the Queen of the Polynesian Islands, a woman we will simply say Mama Lucy. And she was the most important female in the Polynesians. And she invited us to the island of Moorea, which is the south pole of this grid. Now, this is something I didn't say, and I think I need to add this right now. The consciousness grid is just like the Earth. It has an axis that runs through it. And the North Pole and the South Pole are very important points. The North Pole happens to be just outside of where the Great Pyramid is, only just a little ways away from it, about 1.5 miles, which is nothing relative to the 25,000 miles of the Earth. And then it goes through the Earth and it comes out. If you went straight through the Earth, you would come out on the ocean, but it doesn't. There's a slight curve in it, and it comes out in an island called Moorea. And this is where the South Pole is, and this is where Mama Lucy was, and she was inviting us to this place. And so we began a journey, and as we went the world, I don't even remember how many countries it was. It was about 14 or 17 countries that were involved in this, with about 50, 55 people. And we all met in Easter Island for the purpose of doing this kind of geomancy on the Earth. And we were met there by the Rapa Nui, who, before they could even talk to us or begin to do anything, they said that we had to do an initiation, a ceremony that was to connect us closer in our hearts and so that we could work together. This was an ancient ceremony where they stripped down their clothes and put body markings on and began to do the ceremony with each one of us in there, and we began to interact in this ceremony. Afterwards, we ate these meals with them, and we connected in such a way that we could then proceed and go on from that time. We spent some time there getting used to the energies, getting to know the people, having the Rapa Nui tell us things that they haven't told people in hundreds and hundreds of years, telling us about their inner cities inside, their tunnels, and knowing all this time the reason why we were there was to do a correction. It wasn't until I was actually there that I began to understand. In fact, it wasn't until we started to do this correction ceremony. They took us way out into this wooded area and told us that this is where the ceremony had to be. And as we were setting everything up, the inner guidance that I follow came in and explained to me why we were doing this ceremony, right at the very, very last moment. And it had to do with the Rapa Nui. The Rapa Nui, at one point, they destroyed all their trees, and so that there was no more food, and they began to eat each other. They began cannibalism. And this cannibalism that they created on that island spread throughout the Polynesian islands, and it was this cannibalism that we had to correct. It had to be forgiven, and they had to forgive themselves in this ceremony, so that what that would do is correct the geometry of above the earth, above the island where we were really, and that in turn would begin to allow the flow to really move through this thing where it could then be born. And so when I was actually taken to the ceremonial site by the Rapa Nui and were shown where it was, and I actually began to set up, putting the cloth in the ground, beginning to put the crystals and everything to arrange for the ceremonial process, it was then that I understood why we were doing this ceremony. And this is important to understand. The Kundalini of the earth did not function because of this distortion that was directly above it in the grid. And it was purposely done by the Ascended Masters and the people involved in this. They didn't want the Kundalini to begin to function before the consciousness grid was born. They need to work together. And so they got the Kundalini in place, but they had to hold it there for about 6 years until the grid was completed. And so then it all made perfect sense of why we were there and what we were doing. And so we began this ceremony, and it was a ceremony that I had never seen before. According to the Rapa Nui, this ceremony had not been performed in anything similar to it for at least 13,000 years. And but that's their story, and I can't really tell you why they said that. And so the ceremony began to unfold with both our group and the Rapa Nui there. And then what it did was it corrected the forgiveness of the cannibalism took place. The energy corrected itself. The grid formed perfectly around the earth for the first time ever, and I felt like it was completed. It felt in my heart, okay, this is done, and I ended the ceremony, and began to end it when something occurred that I did not expect. I had never seen before. Coming out of the sky came this spiraling energy of a golden light, which was coming off of the unity grid, and came down like a tornado, only a soft, gentle tornado. And it came down and it swirled around right down to the earth where we were. Everyone in there had their experiences of this in different ways. We've spent a long time talking about this, but for me, it was the most amazing feeling. I had the sensation that I was in the presence of, I would say, God, or some very high consciousness. It was relaxing. Every cell in my body relaxed, and this golden light just kept swirling around us. And you could actually look up into this tube that stretched high up into the sky. It lasted for what felt like maybe 10 minutes, and then it retracted and went back up into the sky. After the ceremony was over, I talked to the Rapa Nui, and I said, have you ever seen anything like this before? And they said, no, we don't know what that was. And I don't either. At least I didn't then. I understand much more now. But at that point, there's been no reference in any spiritual books or anybody that I have ever known, any of my teachers anywhere that have ever talked about anything like this before. But what I did know was that our guidance was telling us that we had to hurry. We had to run. We had to pack everything up, get on a plane, and fly to Tahiti as fast as possible for the birthing of the grid. Now that it was full, it was complete. It was like a baby that was beginning to crown and was going to come out any minute. And so everybody had to get ready as fast as possible. It had nothing to do with us. It was the baby was going to be born. And so we had to go really fast. And that's exactly what we did. We packed up everything, we threw everything, and then early the next morning we got on a flight. We flew to Tahiti and then proceeded immediately by getting on a boat and heading toward Moorea, which was the south pole of this grid, so that we could be there for the birth of a brand new consciousness on Earth, something that has never happened on Earth before, and synthetically in this way, and a great excitement. It went through me, it went through everyone. We were just like on fire with excitement. And so now we're going to go into another ceremony, a ceremony that we consider to be the As we pulled into Tahiti, Tahiti is like, it's hard to believe that Tahiti actually exists if you've ever been there, because it's so beautiful. The mountains just stretch up to the sky. It is just an incredible place. And we had just come from Easter Island, which is dry and not much on there and everything. And so all these people were used to that. And as we pulled into the harbor, it was one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen in my life. They got so excited that everybody started clapping because of just the pure beauty of this place. And from there, we were met by members of the Queen of Moorea. Not the next day, but 2 days later, we were taken to be before her. Now, of course, she wouldn't allow all 55 people or whatever it was to come there. So there was just myself and a woman named Ruth Tive, who is a Maori, a native Maori from New Zealand, who knew her language, and I felt like she was the right person to be there. So the two of us went to meet with the Queen. The Queen was a huge woman with this very big heart. She was just pure love. And she knew exactly why we were there, that we were there to birth this new consciousness onto the earth and to do the ceremony for this. And she was also there with her another woman who was her assistant directly underneath her. And she opened us with open arms and hugs, and we began to talk. And very quickly into all of this, she said to me, "Where do you want to do the ceremony?" Well, I said, I without thinking too much, I said, well, I would like to do it in the center of the island. The reason I said that was because I was there in 1985, and I had to do ceremony on that same island in 1985 with the same tribe, and they took me into the center of the island, and that's where we did the ceremony. It's in the Serpent of Light book if you want to read that. And so I said, well, how about the center of the island? And she looked at me and she says, well, I can't do that. And we said, why? And she says, well, I don't have authority. I have authority everywhere, but not in the center of the island. I'm sorry, I can't give you that permission. And the person that was her assistant jumps up, ran over to her and says, no, you don't understand. What's about to take place with this ceremony is one of the most important things on earth ever, and just give him permission and we'll deal with everybody later on this. And she said, no, I don't have that authority and I can't do it. And they started getting into a little bit of aggression, you might say. And she says, you have to. And she says, no, I am not going to break the rules. And she says, you must. And she says, no, I will not. And pretty soon they're screaming at each other. And I mean, really putting out some energy. And, I was actually backing up, moving away. And finally, the queen broke down crying and says, no, I cannot do this. And that's when Ruth went over to her, put her arms around her, and spoke to her in her own language and tried to calm her down. But it didn't do any good. I mean, she was a queen. She was not going to do what was not right. And she was only going to stay in the truth, and that was the truth, that she didn't have that authority, and she just wasn't going to do it. And so we left there without any permission to do this ceremony. I went back home to my hotel. I'll never forget this. I sat in there going, oh my God, 13,000 years, millions of people, untold amounts of money spent, 83,000 buildings built all over the world, and many lives were lost doing this whole project. And here we come down to the last few minutes, and two women have a fight, and it's not going to happen? I just didn't believe it. But it really did look like that's what was going to happen. It looked like it was just not going to go anywhere from there. So we sat around for a couple days, 3 or 4 days, I don't know how long it was, just waiting for something to happen. And then, out of the middle of nowhere, we get an invitation from the king of the Polynesian people. His name was Papa Mataru. He was very old. Well, he wasn't that old, but he was in his 80s. And he asked us to come and have a conference with him. Well, this was great because it meant that maybe something would happen where we could continue. Because without permission, we can't do this. We can't just run out into somewhere and do this and run away. This requires the Polynesian people to cooperate with us, to do the ceremony with us. We can't do it, and they can't do it. They need the entire world to be there with them, and that's who we were representing. And so he asked for a meeting, and it was in the afternoon, and I again brought Ruth with me because I knew she could speak the Polynesian language, and she understood their ways and everything else. And so we drove to the address they told us, which was it was his house, and we went into the backyard, and in the backyard there was Papa Mataru in an old white plastic chair in the sand, and his family standing all around him, his wife, his children, and their children, his grandchildren. They were all sitting around there waiting for us to show up. And they had 2 chairs sitting there for Ruth and I. So we came in, and with great reverence we bowed to them and to give him honor for who he was. And he asked us to sit in the chairs. And so we started to introduce ourselves and everything. And while we were doing that, I noticed that he was squinting like this and trying to see who we were. And I realized that he can't see very well. He also couldn't walk very well because you could see his legs were swollen and he had a cane beside his chair that he needed to be able to walk with. And so he stopped for a moment and he said, "Come closer. I have to be able to see you." So I was about 12 feet away from him. And so I moved my chair about half the distance and I sat down and looked at him. And he still was squinting and squinting. He says, "No, you have to come a lot closer. I can't see you." And so I did. I moved the chair till I was about that far away from his face. And I looked and he says, "Can you see now?" And he says, "Yes, I can see." And then he goes really quiet and he says nothing. And so I just sat there waiting for him to make the next move. And he looked at me and he looked at me and maybe 2 or 3 minutes went by. And then suddenly looked at me and maybe 2 or 3 minutes went by. And then suddenly his whole face opened up and a smile went on his face. And this is a quote. He said, "Oh, I remember you. You're from the stars." And he points to the heavens. He says, "I have been waiting to meet you all my life." He says, "Anything you want, you can have it, whatever it is." And immediately, to not lose the momentum, I said, "Well, we would like to go into the middle of the island to do a world ceremony there." And he says, "Absolutely, you can go into the middle of the island. I'll arrange everything." He says, "I'm an old man and I can't walk very well, and I can't walk into the middle of the island, and I really want to be in this ceremony. I feel like I need to be there." He says, "Would you do it here?" Well, there's something I didn't say. The night before, I had a dream. And I had a dream that if you can imagine the grid around the Earth, and that it has a toroidal field, like a magnetic field that goes around it, just like it does with the Earth, and it comes around and it goes in. It comes out of the South Pole and it goes into the North Pole. And so it comes out of Maria and it goes into Egypt. And if you think of that, it's like a big tube. It's a vortex and it's hollow. And I was wanting to be in the center of the island, but what was made clear in this dream, it didn't matter where you were on the island because the tube that we were needed to be within was bigger than the island. And so we could be anywhere on the island. It didn't really make any difference. And then what happened in the dream right after that, it showed me where the ceremony was going to be. It was a very specific place. We were in a bay where the bay came back around and you could see the land on the other side. It was a big sandy beach, and there was a river that came, an inland river that came out and emptied into the ocean right there with this wall that ran along one side, a natural wall, and I could see this. And so the next day when Ruth and I got together to drive to see Papa Mataru, we were just talking, and I told her about I started to tell her my dream, and I got just partly into the dream, and she goes, "I had the same dream." And she finishes the dream. She tells me exactly the same thing, saw the same stuff, and saw the same beach, exactly what it looked like. And I says, "Wow." I says, "This must be, we're supposed to do this." So Papa Mataru says, "I can't go to the center of the island. Would you please do it here at my home so I could be there with you?" And we were on the beach, but we couldn't see because there were all these trees that blocked the beach. So Ruth and I jumped up, ran through the trees, and we both got out there and we looked around and we go, "Oh my God, this is it." And there was no doubt to either one of us, this was exactly what we saw in our dream, and we knew we were supposed to do it there. So we went back to Papa and we said, "Yes, yes, yes. This is where we do it." And he got really happy. He says, "Oh, I can be there, okay." So our next question was, "Well, you are the king. When does the ceremony take place?" Because we didn't know. And he said, "Tomorrow morning at sunrise." And so it was sealed. It was ready to take place for the first time. And we left and went back to tell all the other people what had happened during that day. When I got back there, somebody handed me a letter from Australia. I knew the person, but I hadn't talked to them in many years. But for some reason, they knew I was there and sent me this letter. And so I open the letter up, and it informs me that on the next day, the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon would go into a straight line, and there would be a lunar eclipse, which happened to be on the very day that we were doing this ceremony, and that the shadow of the moon would go directly over the island of Moorea. I go, wow, that's amazing, because we had not planned this, and I didn't even look into the heavens to think about that on those kind of levels. And so now, when I knew that, and we knew the beach and where it was, I was so certain in my heart that we were doing this exactly the way we were supposed to. The next morning at sunrise, all of us pile out of our bus. We squeeze through his backyard and into this beach, and we're all going out into this beach to preparing to do the ceremony. And it was at that moment that I realized I didn't have any idea what I was supposed to do. I didn't know. I was so wrapped up in finding the right place and all these other kinds of things and dealing with the different energies that was there. It never even occurred to me until I'm 5 minutes away from actually doing this. I didn't know what to do. I just dropped down on the sand. I put my head down in the sand so I could be alone, and I asked for inner guidance. And all of my training has been through Native American people and their understandings. And this was different. This was a very interesting ceremony that I had never seen before. But I had to go with what I was being told to do. And so I told everyone to go get something from the water, something from the land, and something from the air. And 3 objects. And so everybody went out. A half an hour later or so, they all came back. And we put these in a sequence of water, earth, air, water, earth, air, all around into my native thing, which was a medicine wheel. It's a circle with a square in the middle for the 4 directions. The ceremony began to unfold in ways, again, that I'd never seen. It was kind of like water or waves coming in, each wave getting stronger and stronger and stronger and then relaxing. And the energy moved in exactly that kind of way. Papa Mataru was sitting on the edge of the circle in his plastic chair because he couldn't sit down on the ground, and he was watching all of this. And finally, the ceremony came to a close and to an end. And what that signified was that Mother Earth was at that moment giving birth to the consciousness of a new grid. It was crowning. Now, there are some things we have to understand in just a moment here. There's a little bit more to this. But the birthing process was beginning. It was just beginning to take place. After it was over with, Papa Mataru called me over to his chair, and I went over to them, and I asked him, what did he want? And he pulled me really close so that nobody could hear. And he said to me, "How did you know to do that ceremony?" He says, "That ceremony was very precise, and we have been keeping that secret for thousands of years. How did you know that?"
TV Pax, transformando vidas. Pax TV, transforming lives.
Então, meus irmãos, estamos de volta. Espero muito que você tenha gostado dessas informações que lhe foram apresentadas nesse vídeo. Lembrando que tem ainda mais um episódio até nós concluirmos essa empreitada. E acredito que a grande reflexão que o programa de hoje nos traz é o quão nós somos importantes nesses processos de ativação. Porque se você entre na internet, procure, veja o tamanho da grade crística planetária, veja a quantidade de pontos e perceba que esse grupo, essa cerimônia, esse ritual que o Drunvalo fez, ele foi apenas um dos milhares ou até milhões que foram feitos ao redor do planeta nesses pontos específicos. E às vezes até você pode ter participado de uma ativação, pode ter ativado um vórtex energético, pode ter desempenhado uma função primordial na ativação dessa energia que vai guiar a humanidade para a Era de Ouro sem nem ter consciência. Então, meus irmãos, a reflexão de hoje, em primeiro lugar, tenham paciência, saibam que estão num solo sagrado, permitam-se serem a expressão de Deus Pai e Mãe na Terra. Não se questionem. Façam como o Drunvalo. Ele não sabia a estrutura litúrgica do ritual a ser desempenhado naquele momento. Ele simplesmente ouviu o coração, aquietou o ego, permitiu que a centelha divina emergisse, e a centelha, como parte holográfica de Deus, ela sabe o que ela tem que fazer, ela sabe aonde ela tem que estar. Então, meus irmãos, vamos ouvir a nossa centelha divina sem questionar. Se sentir no seu coração que deva fazer uma oração em uma cachoeira, faça. Se sentir no seu coração que deva fazer uma oração na beira de um rio, faça. Muito provavelmente você vai estar ativando e manipulando forças que vão além do seu entendimento. Forças de suma importância nesse momento onde a balança elemental do planeta Terra está se equilibrando para que nós possamos trilhar uma nova humanidade. Então, meus irmãos, convido vocês a não perderem o nosso próximo programa, Momento Quântico, onde eu vou transmitir o último vídeo dessa série. Vamos fechar esse raciocínio e vamos ter aí umas breves férias e voltaremos em 2016 numa nova fase, numa nova etapa, já estudando novos pontos aí da mecânica quântica, da física quântica e da humanidade. Então, meus queridos, eu conto com a audiência de vocês na semana que vem. Bons estudos, pesquisem, mandem suas dúvidas aqui para a TV Pax, comentário, sugestão, alguma coisa que não entendeu ou que conflitou com alguma informação que você já tinha, entre em contato, participe, mande o seu e-mail, que eu, Flávio Salazar Melquisedeque, terei o maior prazer do mundo em discorrer com você e juntos construirmos conhecimento. Lembrando que conhecimento é força e é isso que nós estamos precisando. Eu disse força e não poder, porque o bem e o mal têm força. Poder, só Deus. Então, meus queridos, eu sou Flávio Salazar Melquisedeque e vocês assistiram mais um Momento Quântico aqui na rádio e TV Pax. Mais uma vez, muito obrigado. Até a próxima semana. Namastê.
Eu vi mamãe Oxum na cachoeira, sentada na beira do rio. Eu vi mamãe Oxum na cachoeira.
TV Pax, transformando vidas.